Hello everyone, welcome again to another edition of SQL Server 2022 Tips and Tricks. In today's installment I wanted to talk about best practices and security practices that you should take into consideration if you have a SQL Server. I think this is going to be like a small mini series embedded in this series of SQL. I'm gonna try to do like maybe 2 or 3 different videos about those best practices and try to squeeze as much things as possible. And of course I will use my notes because I don't remember everything from on the top of my head. Okay, so let's start. First of all, first thing that you should actually take care of is keeping your logs and tempdb separate from your system database. So that's the first thing that you should actually consider while installing SQL Server. In my current let's check Management Studio. I think in my current setup, when I was installing SQL Server, I actually did this, and I have a separate space here. I created a MySQL folder, and I have here things for the reports, for logs, and for backups. We're gonna check in a moment. Okay, so let us actually check the properties. We're gonna go to database settings, and as you can see, we got here database default location. So we got the default data location, which is on my C drive, and logs are being logged into the E drive, and backups are being done to the E drive. So best to keep those two things separate, because logs tend to actually get quite large. So as you know, there is no point to keep the main database on the same disk as logs and backups as well. Okay, next thing that we should take care of, so of course changing SQL Server default port. Okay, so changing the default port of our SQL Server. So for that we will actually go to our SQL Server Configuration Manager, and here we're gonna go to Server Network Configuration, and let's check protocols. We got here protocols, and if we go here to properties, okay, so we're gonna check TCP IP. Let's check properties. We got here IP addresses, and as you can see, this is the default port of SQL Server. Of course, many of you might know it already. If you don't know it, now you know. It's 1433, and of course here we have like a static port, which is actually it's given on default while SQL is being installed. So if you want to change the port, of course you can do it, but before changing the port we will need to actually scratch those ports from here, from all of the IP configs here, and we'll use it in IP all. So basically it will apply to all of those. So this setting is going to apply to all of these. So you can either use dynamic. If we're going to use dynamic, we're going to put like 0 here, blank. If dynamic ports are not enabled, to use dynamic port, set it to 0. So basically if we set it to 0, let's apply it. Now we're gonna have to just restart our SQL Server. And if we go back here, we're gonna take a look in our properties, IP addresses once again. As you can see, the dynamic port has been changed to some kind of port that it was pulled out of the pool, just a random pool. So basically you can either use this port that was created dynamically, or you can input your own port that you want a SQL Server to have. So let us stick for now with this port, doesn't matter. I'm just gonna copy the port. And if you actually want to log in with the port that you have changed, we're gonna connect to the database. And now as you can see, now we are actually connected on the port to the database. I'm gonna disconnect from here, and now we are connected. So if you want to connect, it's very easy. You just need to do like a comma, and then you add the port number, and you are connected with the port. Okay, so next thing, after you change the default port for SQL, of course, you would need to use a SSL certificate, or at least this is considered to be a best practice, and security practices as well. So using SSL certificates. So here I have just a basic script that will actually create a sales sign certificate, because I don't have a certificate made for my SQL Server. So I will use the script. So I got the script here. Let us open the script. I'm just gonna go through it fast just to see. Okay, so maybe we can actually copy this. And we can just paste it here. Okay. And let us just save it. And of course I will check if I have ctemp. Okay, so it should be here. So the certificate should be, I'll just scratch this one, should be created. So basically my server, which is hosting, this is Windows Server 2025, which is hosting SQL Server, it's part of a domain. So this is my domain. So I'm creating a self-signed certificate for this FQDN, so for this computer name that is in the domain. So I'm specifying the whole name, so not only the SQL, but I'm gonna specify SQL dot and then the domain name as well. So this is the certificate I'm gonna use. So let's run PowerShell, and as an administrator I'm gonna go to C drive. I'm gonna use the okay. Maybe I'm just gonna open it so we can actually check the certificate when it's actually created. Okay, so basically what this script does, it creates a self-signed certificate. It imports the certificate to the trusted root. Okay, so here's the certificate, and now we can actually check the certificate here. I'm just gonna check in certificates, computer certificates, and let's check here. So in trusted root we should have our, and there it is. And now we can actually go to the certificate itself, into the properties. We can do this, enable only for following purposes, and we're gonna only enable it for server authentication. So it's gonna be only used for server authentication. Okay, so we got the certificate done. Here it is. So now we need to apply the certificate to SQL Server. So once again we'll need to use SQL Server Configuration Manager. I'm gonna run it as an administrator. We're gonna go to network configuration protocols. I'm gonna go here to the properties, and here you have certificate. So now if you have created the certificate correctly, you should be able to list it here. So as you can see, I got my certificate listed here. I don't need a friendly name. A friendly name is just something that you can actually apply in the script if you wish. I didn't use it right now, just for the purposes of this test and showing you how it works. So now we're gonna apply. Next, we're gonna go to force encryption. We're gonna change this to yes. We're gonna apply this as well. Okay. And now if we go to SQL Server Services, we're gonna go to the service. We're gonna go to properties of the main SQL Server service. And as you can see, this is a virtual. This is a virtual account. So you won't be able to restart your SQL Server after applying the SSL certificate with this virtual account. Okay, so just for the sake of everything, let's just restart. I'm gonna show you that it's not gonna work. So as you can see already, it should be start immediately, so it's gonna pop out with an error because the account is virtual and it cannot be used for this kind of operation after changing the certificate. So since I'm using a local account here that is actually connected to SQL Server, and this local account is being used as a main account in my SQL Server, so I'm just gonna go to built-in accounts, local system. I'm gonna apply this. Now we're gonna start the service. Okay, so everything is fine. The service has been started. We can also start this server agent. So now if you want to actually check if you done everything correctly and you are using now the SSL certificate, I will just close down all of this. So you can actually disconnect. Let's connect once again. And here in the encryption, I will go to always encrypted. I'm gonna enable always encrypt as well. Trust server certificate encryption is mandatory here. Okay, so we're gonna connect, and now we're gonna choose a new query. And if we go here, you can see the padlock and it says encryption. So everything is fine, and the SSL certificate is working like it should be. Okay, so we have SSL covered. We changed the port. Let's check next thing. One more thing I wanted to show is actually hidden in a registry. So if we go to our registry editor, we're gonna go here. Let's actually paste it like this and go to here. So basically, what's this key? So HK local machine software, Microsoft, of course, Microsoft SQL Server. I'm going to the Microsoft SQL Server folder, and then I'm choosing my instance, so the one I'm using right now, which is MS SQL 16. I got MS SQL Server here, and you need to go to the folder called SuperSocket Netlib. Why? Because if you want to actually check if your certificate is the same as it should be, here you have your certificate that is being used right now by your SQL Server, and this is the thumbprint of this certificate. So if you want to match those two, you can always, of course, properties, open with extensions, share. Okay, open. Nope. I would need to probably go to my, alright, I need to go to my MNC. Yeah, I forgot that this is a PFX, so wouldn't be able to show it to you then. So let's go to the trusted root, and from here we're gonna be able to check the properties and the certificate. Details, where's the thumbprint? And here's the thumbprint, right? 72 FA, 72 FA. So basically, this is how you can actually check if the certificate that you're using is the correct one. So just a small misfuck. I forgot about the thing that it's a PFX file. Okay, that we're back on track. So after all of this mumbo jumbo, we can go into next thing. That is actually disabling the SA account in SQL Server. Okay, so that's one of the basic things that you should actually do once you are actually using the SQL Server database. Okay, so we're gonna go to security tab. We're gonna go to logins, and here we have all our accounts, all of the accounts that are being used. So this is the SA account. So basically you can do it in both ways. You can either do it via query, or you can just go here to the properties of this particular account. You can go to status, and here we have a login enabled. We're gonna disable it. Grant permission. No, the permissions are not going to be granted. And basically now the account is disabled. Or if somebody wants, like I said, it can be done by let's go back here, status. Okay, start a refresh. Can be done by a query, and the query is as follows. This is the query. Okay, yeah, enable it. Okay, so now we can, as you can see, now it's disabled. But if you want to check it with a query, you can also verify it by doing the select. And it's disabled, set to 1. Okay, so this is how you actually disable the SA account, both ways, either with query or indirect approach. Okay, what's next on our list? So number 5 is going to be enabling TLS 1.3. So keep in mind, of course, if you are going to be using TLS, you might consider using the newest one, if that's going to be even possible in your environment, because of course sometimes it's not possible depending on what kind of environment you're running on and what kind of things are actually connecting to SQL Server and what SQL Server is connected to. So, but if you are actually able to use TLS, SQL Server 2022 can use version 1.3, and if it's available, then it should be used. So, how to use it? Well, first of all, we're gonna go to this particular place in our registry. So I'm gonna show you how you can enable TLS. Once again, just a reminder, I'm using Windows Server 2025, so the newest one. Okay, so we are here in protocols. So we are in CurrentControlSet, control, SecurityProviders, SCHANNEL protocols, and here we're gonna create a key, and that is gonna be called TLS. Okay. And here we are gonna create 2 D words. So one D word. There's gonna be a second D word. Okay. It's gonna rename. So we're gonna rename the first one. So the first is gonna be just called enabled, and it's gonna be set to 1. Okay. Let's set it to 1. Okay, and the second one is gonna be called disabled by default. Of course it can. Okay. Right. So basically we have set both of those. So the first one needs to be set to volume 1, and the second one needs to be set to volume 0. So this is how it is. That's fine. So the key has been created. We're gonna disconnect from the database. We're gonna restart our server. And after that we can actually check with a PowerShell commandlet if TLS 1.3 is enabled and ready to be used. Okay, so let's go to PowerShell. Just gonna wait a moment because all of those services need to start up. And let's check. So for verify, I'm gonna use this commandlet. So cannot find the path. Okay. Okay, so we're gonna check once again. Okay, so in this case we are gonna actually set it up with PowerShell. So I'm gonna set it up. First I'm gonna create the path. So it's not gonna be in HK local machine. It's gonna be here in system. And then let's check the volume. I don't know if it's gonna show right now, but maybe I need to restart. Probably yes, so just let's restart once again. Okay, so now let's check. Because to be honest, I didn't really remember the correct path where it should be actually placed. That's why I made those additional PowerShell commandlets. Okay, so it should be enabled. Now let's check. All right. So everything is fine. It has been enabled. HK local machine system CurrentControlSet control SecurityProviders as channel protocols TLS. Okay, so basically the commandlet has done the job and TLS is being enabled. Okay, so I'm gonna put those commandlets under the video so you can use them if you wish. Gonna start the services. Okay, next thing, what do we have? Okay, so we finished the startup part. Now we are going to the configure some security parameters in SQL. So basically we're gonna need to go again to our manager, management studio, and configuring those parameters will actually help you with securing your SQL server. Okay, so let's do a new query here. We're gonna start with just sp-configure. So if we're gonna do sp-configure, you can actually see a little bit of options that are actually available for your SQL Server database. You might have used them before, you might not have used them at all, but this is the way to get them, and you can change them very easily. I will show you in a moment. But those are not all the options that you can actually use, because this option, show advanced options, is not being used at the moment. So if you want to get all the available options, you need to actually use the show advanced option, which I'm gonna use right now. So you're gonna do sp-configure, show advanced options. We're gonna set it to 1, so it's gonna be enabled. Sorry, I need to go back there. Execute copy, show advanced options. Okay. Now let's do okay. So as you can see, we got quite a lot of options here, about 95 at the moment. So basically you needed to enable the advanced option, so you could actually see all of the options that are available here. Quite a lot of them here, but I'm just gonna talk about the ones that are actually valid for your security purposes. Okay, so let's start. So maybe first of all, CLR integration. So CLR integration in SQL Server allows the integration of .NET code written in languages like C or VBNet with SQL Server, enabling developers to write managed code. And that can be executed with SQL Server itself. CLR stands for Common Language Routine Runtime, which is the virtual machine component of Microsoft.NET framework. So basically, the best practice is, if you're not using it, you should actually disable it. So this is what it needs to be. So this is what it's actually suggested by Microsoft. I'm gonna just use something like that. CLR enabled. Okay, reconfigure. So let's check CLR enabled. Okay, execute. Okay, so it's fine. So we're gonna basically disable this option. Next option that should be disabled in SQL Server 2022, XP CMD shell is a system stored procedure that allows you to execute operation system commands directly from SQL Server. It provides the ability to run shell commands like those you would run in command prompt or Powershell on the server where SQL Server is running. This can be useful for a variety of administrative tasks, such as file manipulation, running batch scripts, or interacting with other external programs, all from within SQL Server. So once again, if you're not using it and you don't want to create another thread in your SQL Server unnecessarily, or a hole that may actually lead to a thread, then it should be disabled. Okay. So now we're gonna go to the user connections. So user connections, this parameter, well, okay, so you need to be careful with this one, okay, if you're actually changing this. User connections parameter in SQL Server refers to configuration settings that control the maximum number of concurrent user connections allowed to SQL Server instance. This setting can be useful for limiting the number of active connections to prevent overloading the server, especially in environments with high traffic or limited resources. Considerations: system connections. The user connections settings only limit user connections, not system connections. such as those used by SQL Server itself for internal purposes. SQL Server will always retain the necessary connections for its own internal processes and maintenance tasks. So this is very important if you are considering using this parameter and changing it, or actually limiting this parameter. Impacts on applications. Limiting user connections may affect applications that require many simultaneous database connections. Be sure to understand your application's connections requirements before setting a low limit. Dynamic adjustments. The user connections parameter is dynamic, meaning it can be adjusted without requiring a restart of SQL Server. However, any significant change in the number of connections allowed might impact active sessions. Then we have also settings for SQL Server instances. For large or shared SQL Server instances, settings an appropriate limit of the number of connections may help in managing resources effectively. For example, in environments where numerous applications are connected to the database, you might want to limit connections to ensure no one application or user consumes all available connections. Connection pooling. Many applications, especially web applications, use connection pooling to manage and reuse database connections. Setting the user connections limit could cause connections pooling behavior to be affected, so ensure that your applications handle connection pooling appropriately. So, for instance, we are setting the user connections here to 500, no more than that. Of course, like it said here in this document, you need to be very careful with what you are actually setting here, because once this limit is done, nobody else can actually connect to SQL Server, because all 500 sessions are being actually used up. Okay, let's check SP configure. Users connections, we got 500 here. Everything's set. Okay. Next we got all automation procedures. So in SQL Server 2022 provide powerful mechanisms for integration SQL Server with internal applications or components, enabling automation of tasks outside the scope of traditional SQL operations. However, due to potential security risks, it is essential to carefully manage and monitor the use of those procedures, ensure they are enabled only when necessary, and always consider the security implications before allowing SQL Server to interact with external systems. Yeah, because basically this can be a potential threat. So like I said before, I only picked the really necessary security risk options that you should consider in SQL Server, so I'm not just pulling those out of nowhere. Okay. Okay, so basically, as you can see, all of those, as I have shown previously, like the CLR enabled. So you got here, of course, number one means that this is enabled, right? So if you want to disable the option, you're gonna use zeros. So you're gonna use 0 here, of course. If you want to disable CMD shell, you're gonna use 0, right? 0 here for the automation. Probably when I was writing this, I forgot, or maybe I was in such a haste that instead of writing zeros here I write 1. So just bear in mind that all of those options need to be disabled, not enabled, because 1 means enabled, right? So I'm not gonna go back to the options on my SQL server and disable them right now, because I'm gonna leave them as they are, because this is basically a test environment either way. So okay, but remember just zeros to disable those options. Okay, next we're gonna have a startup prox. So startup prox option is a configuration setting that controls whether SQL Server should automatically execute certain stored procedures during the startup process. These stored procedures are often referred to as startup procedures, and they are typically used to perform initialization tasks when SQL Server starts, such as setting configuration values, performing checks, or logging certain startup information. When this setting is enabled, SQL Server will look for specific system database called master and check for any stored procedures stored in the sysdb user schema that are marked as startup procedures. These stored procedures are then automatically executed during the SQL Server startup sequence. By default, the scan for startup prox options is set to 1, meaning the SQL Server will automatically scan and execute any stored procedures that are defined as startup procedures during SQL Server startup. Okay, so once again we are disabling this. Okay. And the last one is going to be cross-database ownership chaining. CDOC is a security feature in SQL Server that allows users to access objects in different databases when those databases have the same owner. This feature is helpful in scenarios where users need to interact with objects in multiple databases without requiring explicit permissions on each individual object across database. Okay, so once again, if it's not used, it should be disabled. And it was set to 0 on the default, so nothing has changed. Okay, so basically that's it. If it goes to the all the parameters, all the database parameters. So I will conclude this video because it was quite long. If you like the content, as always, like and subscribe, and I will see you in the second video of best practices for SQL Server and security practices. I will see you soon.